Hey there! Recently I've played a couple survival-likes, and by a couple I mean almost every single one I put my sight on. So now I'm perfectly equipped to say that it's time to start questioning my life choices. But instead of that, we are going to talk about how a game that looks straight out from the 90s, that can be played with a controller from 50 years ago, keeps stealing the hearts of players, to the point that it created a genre of its own and became Game of the Year according to Phat. Also about how the genre seems to be burning down after flying too close to the sun, and finally about which one is the best I've played. A game that not only fixes Vampire Survivors' biggest mistakes while being its own thing, but it is so cheeky that it also took the best part from Final Fantasy VIII, Triple Triad, and made it local multiplayer. I'm even going to show you that survivor-likes were already played in the early 80s. All of this for the nifty price of your attention. But before all that, a heads up. You could convince me about these games being an eugenics conspiration designed to get rid of people with epilepsy, so you have been warned. Back on track. We might as well define what is a survivors-like. And what they are is a working in retail during Black Friday simulator, where we are dropped in the middle of a horde, and our objective is to dance with the monsters trying to balance our skill and power with their increasing number and strength until we hit the time limit, kill the boss, or whatever the game we are playing uses as the endpoint of our run. Gameplay-wise, they are as simple as clicking the subscribe button. We basically move around, pick whatever enemies drop to gain currency and experience, and choose skills, both active and passive, that will appear as we level up, where we'll be given a pick from the whole set, forcing us both to strategize, creating new synergies, and adapt to whatever choices we get on a run. They are the type of game that makes you go, wait, what is this? Are we back in the 90s? Then you remember that 90s media was amazing, give them a go, and the next thing you realize is that saying, just one more try before going to sleep, wasn't a good idea, as you just lost your job, your cat left you, and you certainly need a shower. Before getting into what these games do well, I want to get into what they don't do. As I've seen around how many claim that Vampire Survivors uses gambling psychology or gambling techniques to hook us, especially aiming at how chests work in game. Which was an easy shot at the dev, since he worked on that industry in the past. So here is why Vampire Survivors chests are not equivalent to gambling in a simplified way. Gambling is based on variable interval reinforcement at a cost. Since they compare these games with slots, I'll use them as an example. First, we need an extremely simple repetitive behavior that our brains can log as the trigger, pushing or clicking a button usually. That action requires a cost, something we risk to lose. For slots, that is putting a coin in. By doing that, we'll be given a chance of getting a reward, but we don't know when we'll get it, not which one we'll get. Just that if we repeat the behavior enough, it will end up coming. Most of the time, we'll lose. And losing a coin is not a big deal, but costs add up, and soon enough our brains start operating under sunk cost fallacy, which is that feeling of having invested so much into something that it would be stupid to stop before recovering our losses. Because even with our fancy suits, we still are silly apes, horrible at calculating odds and managing anxiety. Then we win. The machine will start making lots of noise, coins cascading and our brain explodes in dopamine. That feeling of going from anxiety to a high is extremely addictive. Anti-consumer gacha games work in a similar way, but since they give pixels instead of money, they always have to give you something. So they design a set of rewards that are the equivalent of nothing with a ribbon on it. As useful as if a slot machine popped a ticket that said, "You can do it, loser," every time you lost. Now let's compare them with how a chest works in most survival-likes. Chests have no cost, nor they need you to take specific action for them to drop, as I could remove them from the game and you'd kill the mobs that drop them nonetheless. There is no feeling of loss as there are no stakes. Every single time you get a chest, you will get a reward that will improve your skills. There is some randomness, as most chests will give you one reward, some 3 and rarely 5. This is direct reinforcement with variable rewards, which is what you'll find on most games. Why do they call this gambling though? Well, because those chests popping open look gambly, and because clickbaiting is very effective. With that said, let's try to point out why these games are so enjoyable while using Vampire Survivors as the main example, being the one that started the craze. The first reason is that they are extremely stimulating. Vampire Survivors developer did bring something from the gambling scene. Not gambling psychology, but attention-related psychology or neuromarketing if you will. Slots are probably the most boring thing you can do with your life, so to convince you to play them, they have to grab your attention.
Look how they mask with my boy.
This is why casinos look and sound like fairgrounds. But what if what you had was a decent game? Well, that's what the Italian dev did. He picked a game called Magic Survival and cloned it while throwing in his knowledge about how to get your attention. And the contrast, well, just look and listen to it. While Magic Survival feels and sounds like a rainy afternoon reading a newspaper, Vampire Survivors feels like a hyper-caffeinated morning in a theme park. Saturated colors, massive contrast, flashing lights, effects exploding all around, damage numbers, a countdown. When things get loud, the game sounds almost identical to a pachinko parlor. Vampire Survivors' design screams so much for your attention that I wouldn't be surprised if the game decided to open an OnlyFans. What this is an arcade, and I don't mean it only as in the genre. I mean that you could tweak it a bit, slap it on an arcade machine, and it would fit perfectly well. And it's done in a smart way, as all the stimulation from the start would turn many people off, but the game starts slow and it goes into a crescendo so our senses don't saturate, but tension grows as the timer gets closer to its end and death comes to whisk us away. The next key aspect is that these games are extremely simple, but at the same time they are rather deep, like a bucket. Over 90% of their content is pure gameplay. The flow of playing, using currency and playing again is effortless. This is quite old school, on a world where games have gotten more and more complex and the gaming industry is in a constant contest of who has it bigger, the open world that is. Modern games have us spending most of our time doing relocation or management tasks in between gaming chunks. Even well-loved games as Zelda will have us spending most of our time as Link's Uber, while crucifying Koroks. And yeah, I know that exploring those games is fun. I'm a sucker for them myself, and you don't know how hyped I am to see how the Wayward Realms breaks my heart. But how many times have you wanted to play a deep, engaged game, but ended up doing something else because you couldn't deal with getting into a complex game or story? That's your brain not being convinced of paying the cost starting the action of playing a complex game has. But for survivor likes, there is barely any cost. They are almost the minimal expression of what a game can be. Not only that, to play a survivor like, you need the attention span of a TikTok addict, which is around the same level of the average fruit fly. The game will do the carrying by keeping us in a constant loop of avoiding enemies by the skin of our teeth while picking loot. And our brains have evolved for both picking nice stuff and running from risk, so keeping yourself in front of the screen is extremely easy as long as the feeling of risk is sustained. So we have an arcade game, but how do you turn one of those into something you can sell and that people will play for hours? What is the excuse to hit play again? Because that can't just be easy, it has to be compelling. This was achieved in yet again a very smart, old way. For starters, they are easier, allowing longer stretches of gaming without dying, and secondly, they are full of progress, quests and secrets. On a pure arcade, the only way to improve is to improve your skills. On these games we'll improve those, but also will improve our passive stats, unlock characters, new skills, new maps. Some of them will even have a hub area to build up. We have tons of quests and achievements to unlock. There is always something else to do. And finally, we have another key factor that makes these games well loved. They tend to be cheaper than those fancy half coffee, half diabetes laxatives with your name badly written on the cup. And the game with an overwhelmingly positive rating at that price, on an age where companies seem to be testing if our IQs have gone below room temperature with their pricing, is something hard to argue with. When games like Tears of the Kingdom come out at €60 and they still lack content behind buying 26 amiibos for a total price of what I paid for my first car, you can bet my money goes to the fur one. But hey, this is not a ripoff, and the figurines sit on massive translucent butt plugs because they like it. Look at their faces. This is not because they cut costs by not using materials or designing inner structures capable of holding their own weight. And before someone comes and tells me how you don't need any of those items or cosmetics, let me remind you that pirates have the game you paid $60 for unlocked for free. But I digress. The thing is that we shouldn't be surprised about these games working extremely well. This opens the question: does Vampire Survivors really deserve to be the game of the year while competing with Heroes Hour, Proteus, Signalis, Tunic and many other great indies? I personally don't think it's even the best survivals-like, as after 2 DLCs, they still haven't managed to fix how stupidly powerful we get after unlocking everything, which goes to the point that once your build is ready to go, you can go outside, prepare a snack and ponder about the meaning of life as the game plays itself for 15 minutes straight, which at least for me, kills it. And the award to the best design makes me raise an eyebrow, as it's basically a copy of another game made with assets, let's say dangerously inspired by Castlevania. Also used by previous game, with clearly traced artwork on its menu screen, which I'm not holding against the developer, as by his own definition Vampire Survivors was a hobbyist game with zero budget. I think the more interesting question is how many people has paid attention to the BAFTA awards after they made this announcement. It's a great game, yeah, extremely popular, sure, but the best? I'll let that to your own judgment. I personally agree more with the breakthrough award they won at the Golden Joystick, as the biggest thing they did was reminding us that simpler arcade games are still a blast, and I'd love to see more of them in the future. But even that's not new. We already had Survivors likes in arcades before. As a matter of fact, when a good mate that sometimes, just sometimes, makes a lot of sense told me about Vampire Survivors, I got Smash TV flashbacks, as that one was basically the same, but on stages, and in the theme of
Barton Eka, the running man.
But it goes deeper. Look at this one. It's loud, it's flashy. We are dropped on the middle of a map where everything tries to kill us. This is a Survivors-like called Robotron 2024. A game that portrays a future where robots have taken the world, some of which are called Terminators, and you have to save the last hope for humanity. And it came 2 years before a fancy movie called
The Terminator.
back in '82. And if you read comments from people who played it as a child, it caused the exact effects Survivor likes are causing today. Survival likes, or Robotron likes I guess, have been working perfectly fine for 40 years. If you need more convincing of Robotron being a Survivors like, keep in mind that the year it came out, Survivor released its big hit, Eye of the Tiger. You know, the one that sounds like. Let that work as a segue
to our sponsor.
Shush, not here. To the reason why this genre is at risk of crashing down. Creating something is easier than ever, and everybody has heard that quote.
Good artists copy, great artists steal.
Which is a twist of the original quote, great poets imitate and improve, whereas small ones steal and spoil. But if you sell apples, you can't hate thieves. So whenever something succeeds, we see thousands of, let's say, inspired works. For example, every second song will have this type of drum beat. Almost every new Asian webcomic will smell like solo leveling, and most new Hollywood pieces feel like a rerun of your neighborhood trash truck unloading, and the gaming industry is a tad more lax regarding copyright. If in cinema imitating is the Joker snatching this scene from Fight Club, what happens in gaming would be taking Fight Club and selling, Club Fight, as competitors try to replicate success, sacrificing innovation for imitation. But the thing is that defining success is extremely hard. Trying to do so would make me feel like those authors who sell books with the secret to becoming rich, while they became rich by selling those books. And if we read interviews with its creator Luca Galante, we can summarize his reaction as, wait, what? Am I rich now? With lots of Italian hand signs. So if what you want is to emulate Vampire Survivors' success, what you should do instead of copying the game is learning from its good parts, learning about marketing, and invest hard on your luck stat. But here we are, on a market saturated with carbon copies of Vampire Survivors. From Survivors with pets, Survivors for kids, Survivors HD, Survivors 3D, Survivors 3D HD with graphics on Ultra, to Survivors for those of you who want to play as a VTuber, use a body pillow as a shield and a boys love comic as your weapon of choice, because I'm not going to tell you not to follow your dreams. Besides, this one is free, very good, and it has something I didn't ever think I'd say. A fair gacha system. But getting inspired by a game is fine, right? Didn't the same happen with the Souls-like genre? Yes, it happened, but there is a small difference. Dark Souls is extremely complex in nature, mechanics and style, so you could replicate 100 different aspects and come up with so many different games that it has become hard to answer what is actually a Souls-like. To the point where if you go outside, touch some plants to feel like a good Instagram influencer, to then realize that you've been walking the dog for 3 hours and he still hadn't done his stuff, suddenly, as long as you are Dutch roll certified, that dog walk will appear as a Souls-like on the Steam page. So whenever someone asks you what a Souls-like is, you can only say, everything, my friend, everything is a Souls-like. As long as you can Dutch roll, that's very important. For Survivor-likes, their simplicity is their biggest asset and the curse of the genre. All the ones that don't innovate a lot feel extremely similar. You played one, you played them all. Which shows on sale numbers and reviews. The fact that most of the games I've showed on this video cost me around as much as Vampire Survivors alone should tell you something. And the ones that are trying to evolve the genre end up buried in the pile of copies. For example, Bounty of One, which is Wild West multiplayer Survivors, Road Genesia, which added modding support and map progression, or Repetendium, with a chicken on a rock trying to reach the center of the world while carrying machine guns. Hence the question, will survivors survive? Another good question would be, which one should you play, if you only want one, the best one? According to me, a game critic so trustworthy that can't even get through Cuphead's tutorial without external help. Try Boneraiser Minions, a game about a small necromancer trying to live his, death I guess, that gets harassed by the annoying forces of humanity. A game that fixed Vampire Survivors' balance by changing skills into raised undead, while we as the necromancer remain as puny and frail all the time, so tension and feeling of danger do not go away, as we are not more powerful, just better accompanied. Don't you want to micromanage your own graveyard with traps, bonuses and drops to suit your needs? What about playing all the different game modes, getting a collection of classes, mobs and especially silly hats? Don't you want to get lost on its minigame, a game that competes with Final Fantasy VIII's Triple Triad, and then you can play on local multiplayer? This alone is more than worth the whole price, if you ask me. Look at this handcrafted 8-bit magnificence and that palette that screams retro, which pushed me into asking the developer, why 8 bits in this day and age, given how many people might get scared by such retro pixelated sexiness? To which he answered, I just really prefer the look of chunky pixels. And from what I've seen, all his games follow this style. This type of mad lad is what I talked about in the last video when I told that you should follow your vision without compromising when you create. And the game is one of the few survival-likes that is actually out of early access. But still, look at this update frequency. It sits as overwhelmingly positive at only $3.99, and in the words of Tickle Me Elmo, I'd recommend you buy the game before the developer comes to the senses and doubles the price. I'd also recommend you to subscribe, and feel free to tell me how I'm wrong about everything in the comments. It was lovely having you here, and I hope to see you around.